back with Carrara and Dog Waffle, working together on a sequence of images. In fact, let me first explain here. This is sort of the animation that I've just created, viewing that in earphone view, one of my favorite image viewers, free for home use. And what you can do is see that I actually organized it after the final rendering. I did a render in Carrara. And let's go back to, so here's the model in Carrara. And what I wanted to do is make this a looping animation. So I made it so. And then I want to render that so that it will have the alpha channel. If I render it here with just this, you can see the background colors. I have some sort of a gradient. And that itself is going to be the skylight. So I didn't add any light sources. You can see there's a camera and there's a group with the girl bike right in there, one of the preset prefab models that come with Carrara. It's not a very high quality detailed model, but it's good enough to for me to animate the spokes, animate the wheels, animate the pedals, and then move the camera around it, because what I want to do is have an animation where this thing is going to be loaded into the custom brush in Dog Waffle, and then I can paint it in front of any other animations that's going to be the background. So what's important is to render it with transparent background. So just as a recap, you can do that right here. In the rendering output, you can indicate the format. Right? Sequence targa is what I chose here. And to indicate I want to save it with 30 frames per second, and most importantly, render the alpha channel. Now that's going to take care of it being a 32-bit image. Actually, you can also, maybe just to be safe, also click on options and plugin options, and then make sure it's 32-bit. Although I suppose it will probably do that if you say you want the alpha. I'm not really sure. So it's always better be safe. Make sure it's 32-bit, so it has red, green, blue, and an alpha channel. And then you actually say, yes, you want to render that alpha channel. That will take care of that. Now you can also do the using the pre-multiplied alpha, so that the colors are getting less of that background bleed. And although that's something on still images, we can fix that in Howler as well, if you know what the background color was. And then here we have the set file name. So I set the initial file name to girlbike-targa. I made it clear that the file name indicates what format it is, and then even though it will also add the .tga behind it. But most importantly, I'll also add it, so sort of experimental multipass options. That's one thing that's a very powerful feature in Carrara, that you can have it render more than one image per frame. You can have additional images rendered that contain just the position, the velocity, or some other parts of the scene that could be useful for post-processing, for instance. So I have here an experiment with the object being rendered, the depth, the fragment coverage. And if I go render this very quickly now with very little anti-aliasing, and just to do a quick test, maybe even no anti-aliasing, just to see it render quickly, we have one frame, that's frame 0, then we have another frame, that's frame 1, and then frame 2, frame 3. But for each of these frames, it's actually also saving not just the red, green, blue with the alpha, it's also saving those additional multipass elements. And so I have now about 4 or 5 rendered. I'm going to go back to this, and here you see them, right? Here's girlbike-targa coverage. Has a sequence of 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So I rendered already 5 frames, and the coverage looks like this. And that's actually a really cool thing, side effect, if you want, giving you sort of a an edge wireframe display. And let's see what else. We have the depth. So the depth will indicate how far away the pixels are that are being rendered. Now white is all the way in the background, and then as it gets closer, you see it go all the way to black. So the elements that are far away in the scene, the most distant, are going to merge into white. And that's something that you could use perhaps to use in Dog Waffle to have a Gaussian blur that varies with the distance. So you could make the foreground very blurry and keep it crisp in the background, or invert it and have the background very blurry and make sure it's still crisp in the foreground. So there are other things you can do with that depth information. There is also the object index. Now that one's a little bit more difficult to see. I'm going to do a quick shift U to increase the dynamic range, and then that way you can see that it's essentially showing you each element: the pedals, the tires, the wheels, the spokes, the bracket. So all of these are the different parts in the scene, and that could also be used. We'll see some ways to use that, but of course the most expected or required element is the red, green, blue, and the alpha channel. And so if you look in front view, for instance, you can use information, and here's the clue that the original colors are indeed 32 bits per pixel, so you do have an alpha channel on it. And even though you can't really see the marching ants in this viewer, we will see that in Dog Waffle. So let me launch Dog Waffle here now, PD Howler 9. It's actually a little bit beyond 9.1. It's continuing the beta development on that. And of course we can change. You may have a slightly different look on the colors on the interface. Just keep in mind that you can totally customize that here. The layout, interface colors, let's go on light on dark, or lighter on dark, something like this, and it will remind us we need to restart Dog Waffle for everything to take effect, because you might lose some of the elements. It might have some interference with the Windows themes, so it's a good idea to stop Howler and then go back into it and make sure everything plays fine. So let's have a look at one of those rendered images first. Let's go into Open. And let's see where my bicycle is, right there. And so I have the bicycle. Let's see which one is the Girl Bike Targa. Let's use this one. Okay, so this one should be just the red, green, blue, and the alpha channel. And actually the background seems to be black. Can we see the alpha channel? Well, let's go to the selection mask and enable alpha on off. By default it was off. Oh, look at that, it looks like this one did actually load without an alpha channel, so we may not have the alpha channel, the sequence in there. Let's see if we load that into the brush. If we go into Open and load that same image or something like that into the brush, and then we preview PRV, yeah, look at that, it looks like it has an opaque background. So my bad there, I did something wrong with the output, but let's still see what else we can do with that. In fact, you know what, let's go back to the early ones, because really what I did is I'm experimenting now with this short sequence that I aborted after about 5 renderings. Here what I did is, just to show that you have coverage, you have depth, you have object index, those were the the optional multipass elements, but most importantly you'll have the targa and should have the alpha in there too. The thing is, I actually did that for the entire animation and then created these subfolders, and so that's what you see here, coverage. Let's go to RGBA, and so here you see that. So I'm going to load one of those and see if I actually managed to get the alpha channel properly there. So let's go to Brush, Open, and RGBA, and get the first one. And no, it looks like that one also has, darn it, I'm gonna have to revisit what I did wrong here. Well, there's a couple of things I wanted to do in this tutorial, so let's focus on the other things first, and that is to actually use how to load those image sequences into both the animation or into the animator brush, right here. So you can load a sequence into the animator brush. Let's do that. Let's go load sequence, and I'm going to, you can have it either in BMP or in Targa in this version. I'm going to take the Targa and load the sequence. So now you need to simply indicate where that thing is located. Select the folder, and the bicycle is there. And let's say I want to see the object index, the depth, the coverage, or the RGBA. Let's take the RGBA, and so in here it finds a bunch of files that are the Targa files from that render sequence. Let's load those. So it's loading that entire thing into the alpha, into the animator brush. And you know what, this one seems like it does actually have, I think this one will be good. I think this one has the alpha channel. So yep, looks like it's transparent behind it. So let's go and enable preview, paint with it. Yep, sure enough. Okay, good. So I did actually have that, and maybe when I load it this way, it's I don't know, something I didn't quite do the right manipulation. But you can see now, if I store this brush, go to Brush, Store, Manage, Copy, you have the plaid pattern indicating the transparency, and you have the fully opaque bicycle. You can show the film strip, right? And this is a custom brush made of multiple frames, a total of 120 frames in here. This is an animation of 4 seconds at 30 frames a second. There is one more. If you scroll all the way to the bottom, it looks like this is the last frame, but it's not. There is one more frame at the very bottom. And you may want to delete that, because if you paint with this, let's say if you change the background animation here, let's say you load an animation, or let's say you even just have a plain image, new image at let's say this dimension like this. It's plain white. You make this an animation of, let's say, 300 frames, and you know that the animation here in the brush is only 120 frames. So as you're painting with it, it's going to cycle through it. Bicycle cycle, okay, no pun intended there. We can go and change the step distance to a very small, so it's going a little bit faster. There you go, it's cycling through that entire sequence, and it could potentially show that last frame there. So if you, I think there is one there, but I'm never exactly sure. What you could do is delete that frame. So if you have an extra frame at the end, let's see, for instance, if we actually go into the animation brush keyframer. That's another place where you'll use this custom brush, but you'll keyframe its progress. So you can see now, as you scrub through the animation, it's going through, looping it through one. So there's a total of 300 frames here. So about here we shall be reaching the end of the animation. And there it is. Okay, so good. We can now kind of loop that, and let's say we have the animation initially here, and make it much smaller, so it kind of comes from far away. Even like opacity is faded, and make it keyframe, right? Keyframe it there, and then go forward, make it fully opaque, and scale it in. And you see it's keyframed that, so it's actually going through that. It's fading in. And then let's say we want the bicycle, as it's in this orientation, we want it all the way here and even closer. So let's make it bigger. And maybe also tilt it in, so we can change the Z angle here of the entire image that's in the brush. So you can put it here, keyframe that. So you now have a little animation like this. This one is spline interpolated by default. If you don't mind, if you want it precisely linear, you can do that. And let's go over here. Let's bring it into the middle. In fact, let's bring it way bigger, so we kind of have a close-up look at I don't know, the pedals perhaps. Keyframe that, and then bring it here and bring it back down to reasonable dimensions about here. So here's just an idea of how you can take an existing image sequence that's loaded into the animator brush, and then perhaps made it fade away, but this time into the lower left. So let's go scale back down and fade with the opacity. There it is, and there you go. So we now have an animation that's going like this, and let's, we need to just render that. So I'm going to move this over here so we'll actually see what's happening both at the top here and perhaps over here. This is a straight line linear interpolation. If we uncheck this, it's going to be sort of a spline interpolation. There is one little jump at the very end. I don't know if that's a cumulative error or something, but it's not big. We can go and render that. It's not going to always show you the entire animation as it's rendering, especially for lengthy renders. See here, it stopped. It just takes too long to render, so it's not showing it to you anymore. It just keeps going, and you have to wait. It's showing ne répond pas in French. That's my French version of Windows 8. I would be not responding. Just be patient and wait a little bit until it's done, right? You know where it is in the rendering, and it may need a few more seconds, and then once it's done, it will be back. There you go. So now let's go close this and scrub through that. So we've now rendered this animation here. All right, so let's go do a quick playback. FPS, let's make it to 30 frames per second. And there you go. So that's a first look at loading this bike into the brush keyframer and animating it along some sort of a path. And of course, the background being all white, it's difficult to say, but it's definitely using the transparency mask In fact, we can see if we paint over it, that's another way to use this brush. If you enable the preview, you can see the bike here. Because it's an animated brush, if you paint on it with, let's say, the settings or the step distance here at the top very small, something like 2, let's go undo that. You can use the Alt key, hold the Alt key as you're painting. Right, and I'm going to come in from the left side, and as you're painting, it's cycling through the animation. Right, I'm not even painting inside, but the moment you start dragging, if the Alt key is pressed, it's cycling through the animation, as long as you have actually an animated brush holding here in your brush. So you can select the frame where you want to start if you want to actually come in with this other bike here. That would be a way to use it. For instance, you could say first we need to blur this animation we already have. Let's go to the timeline and say Gaussian blur. There you go, Gaussian blur, and let's see, that's too much, but let's give it a little bit of Gaussian blur and render that. Apply this Gaussian blur on the entire animation, and we might even reduce the saturation, maybe invert the colors, do a color add or remove, like remove the red, but that's also changing it on the background. All sorts of things you might do to the background, and now you say, oh, now I have this crisp image of the bicycle in front. And so I'm going to select the brush, so I'm starting with this orientation. I'm going to go to the first frame, there you go, and I'm going to come from the side and drag it in. Let's use the Alt key, let's drag it in. And as I'm doing that, oh wait, that's the step distance is still wrong here. Yeah, so I messed that one up by a few frames. We'll just kill those frames. We don't need that. So keep that in mind. We need to really verify all the parameters that you have here if they matter. We can undo this frame. I don't know that we can undo this frame. Yeah, that's, oh, there it is. Actually, we can undo. Look at that. No, that's, okay, so that's going beyond here. So what I'll do is, or maybe if I right do, there you go. So select this frame and undo that. No, that's not it. So across the animation, that's going to be a difficult one to do the undo. One way you could do though is if you still have this rendered with the animation, there you go. You could actually do this. You could do an undo if you had saved it. So that removes, that had actually saved the image sequence. So that's one way to do it, one level of undo on the entire animation sequence. So now you just need to remember to reapply that blur. Where's the blur? Gaussian blur, and make sure it's not too much of it. Apply that. Okay. So that's always a good idea to keep the save undos there. It's saving the images before the filter is applied, and that allows you to actually recover the animation if you mess something up. So I'm going to actually do something else here also with this brush. It remembers to set the step to 16, so I'm going to force it to 1 or 2, and then I'm going to put that in my browse media. That way I kind of save it. My animated brushes, I'm going to say this is the bicycle. Let's see, bicycle 1, and then that way I can get back to it a little bit faster. There, bicycle 1, and you see that it keeps the step. So if I click this guy, that one has a step distance of 16, but if I go to the browse media, and I might even tack it down if I keep going back, selecting this will not just select the image that was saved with it, but also all the parameters, including the step parameter, the step distance. There is really more to it in a brush. There's more to it than just the images that it contains, especially for an animated brush, but also the parameters such as the opacity, the size, the step distance, and all these other parameters you see here on the settings, random size, speed scale. All of these are saved in the media browser. Okay, but anyway, back to this. Painting the image on top here. I can now go and paint it right there. So I'm going to go with Alt down and start painting my bicycle right here in front. So that's another way that you can paint the animated brush over an existing animation, right? And you see now we have a whole mix of bicycles and a lot of them coming together. All right, so That's the fun way to use an animator brush. We can change the size, we can change the step distance, perhaps make it a little bit bigger so that the bike goes a little bit faster. You might perhaps want to change the size for that too. If you want it to go slow, you reduce the step distance, so it doesn't need as much movement on the mouse to actually show something. And then you might want to make it smaller in that case. So let's go to something like 49, much smaller. Make sure the step is still good and alternate that. So now we actually go through that much quicker, but when we play it back, it's going to be a smooth motion of that small bike. Keep an eye on that small bike right here. And let me just play that final. Almost done here. There you go. It buffers up a lot of mouse movements. And there you go. Alright, so now this is where you can see also that it actually does have one extra frame at the end. You see a little glitch there every once in a while. Let's say if I play it. Boom, there's, I don't know if you could see that. There's a place where when it reaches the end, right there. Let's take a look at this one. See how there's this bike around here? And the frame before you see it, there it is, the big one. Zoom into that. And then the next frame, it's gone, and then the next frame, it's back. And that's because we have this sequence here actually containing one extra frame. That extra frame we need to delete. So I don't know how that came in. It's probably a glitch or something, a bug, and that may be fixed by the time you try that. But what you want to do is, if you see that, you want to delete that extra blank frame if you're going to paint with it, so that you don't get to see that glitchy, that missing one frame. So delete frame will, if you select this, it will really, delete frame will just delete the last frame. And that way, that it is, delete the last frame of this animator brush. So now the lowest you can go down there as you scroll down is the image of the bike. And therefore, if you now go and paint with it, you will not see that little glitch or that little blip, if you want. For instance, if I'm going to paint it right over here with the Alt key down, keep that in mind, and maybe I'm making it a little bit bigger so I can see it better. And there it is. So I'm holding the Alt key down, and it's rendering, and while I'm rendering, it's not able to catch up with all the frames fast enough there. But if I'm zooming in here and playing this, it's a bit difficult to really see. You know what? Let me just clear the animation in the background and recreate an animation of long enough so you can cycle through the whole sequence. So let's say 300 frames. There you go. Now as I'm painting on that with the Alt key down, going through, there you go. Now you should not see any missing frames. Now it's a perfect cycle of playing back that animation all across. Alright, okay, so that's a first look at how to use the RGB values, and of course there are other images that we did load or generate with the rendering in Carrara, and so you might, the idea is really to use it all together. Let's say you load an animation or an AVI. Let me load an AVI that I think I rendered a while back. Where did I render that? Over here in my D drive and under daily dose, and I want to think it's probably under the backgrounds, animated backgrounds. If I only remembered seamless looping animated textures, maybe it's those. No, that's not it, but we could use it there too. I just want to see where it was. Animated brush, maybe here. Well, yeah, that might work. I mean, here we have, let's take this one, the canyon. Alright, so this one has 199 frames, and let's load all that. Alright, so this was one that was created in Dogwaffle, in Howler 9.1 with the ray tracer, Puppy Ray, and we are flying through a little canyon land. Let's say I want to make it a little bit smaller, so I'm going to go to a little bit longer, increase the duration. One way to do that is right-click on the animation bar here and use the time stretch It's not the best and cleanest way to extend the time, but it will work for this quick demo, just to make it twice as big. Make sure we do some frame blending, make it twice as big, so it'll have almost 400 frames, and that gives us enough time to actually have the bicycle show here and have it fly across this animation. Right, so, and this time I'm simply going to paint it with the Alt key down. Right, so make sure the step distance here is small enough, maybe 1 or 2. Let's do 2, and you may want to make it full size, or at least somewhere around 100 units, 100%. And waiting for all of these images in that animated brush to be rescaled, resampled. There you go. All right, so now I'm holding the animation, the Alt key down, and I'm starting to paint. Look at that, just slowly dragging my mouse from left to right. The animation in the background is advancing, and the animation in my brush is advancing. This is an animated brush, a custom brush containing all the images that were rendered in Carrara with the alpha transparency, and you can have it perhaps disappear or come back. So in this case I'm painting it, and therefore I cannot really predict exactly what the size will be, except if I had something like speed controlled or size controlled by the speed, I could potentially do something like or use the mouse or the tablet. If I have a tablet with the pressure, I could map that to the size and also control a little bit how big the bikes are. But you see what I'm doing here is I'm holding the Alt key down, I'm painting with a video on another video, right? One video is the bicycle, that's a short video of 4 seconds, and I'm painting with it over the other one. And that's the one with the train in the background. Alright, so enough of this. I'm going to now stop it and just enjoy this final animation and play it like so.